Great. All right, hi, everyone. My name is Joey Sullivan. I'm the Natural Resources Management intern at both Marsh-Billings-Rockefeller National Historical Park as well as St. Gaudens National Historical Park. Part of my role at the two parks is coordinating these working woodlands workshops, which are designed to connect nature enthusiasts and landowners with natural resource professionals to provide the knowledge and skills to promote land stewardship. We offer a mix of in-person and virtual workshops around a monthly theme. So this month, this is the first workshop in our forest wildlife habitat theme. Next week, March 23rd on Wednesday, we'll have a workshop titled "A Bird's Perspective on Healthy Forests" around habitat management for birds. Today we have Travis Hart, a habitat biologist with Vermont State Fish and Wildlife, who's going to be talking to us about promoting desirable native tree species and wildlife habitat in your woods. So Travis, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can take it from here.
All right, thank you. Before I get too deep into things, I'm just going to share my presentation going here. So just get this up. All right. So my name is Travis Hart. I work out of the Rutland Fish and Wildlife Office. I cover private lands and state lands for the state. So I manage just under 8,000 acres of state lands, WMAs in Bennington and Rutland counties. And then I assist with private lands, technical assistance with the assisting also with the USDA EQIP program that helps provide some funding, which we'll talk about a little bit as well too. And I do that mainly now just in Addison, Rutland, and Bennington counties. I used to cover Windham and Windsor, but we now have some new staff that are covering Windham and Windsor as well. And then we have my northern counterparts as well, which we'll see at the end of the slideshow. So I'm coming to you live from my house here in Poultney this morning. So we'll see how well the internet holds up. Hopefully it holds up fine the whole way through. But yeah, so in general, we're going to talk about some wildlife habitat management. I'm going to go through some common practices in the woods that we have funded that I talk to folks about all the time. And then just give you an idea of what those programs are that you could use, or you could reach out to me or whoever the local contact is in your area if you're interested in doing some of this work and having somebody come out and talk to you and look at your land with you. So first and foremost, active management is always a good thing for wildlife. There's definitely certain spots of the woods where at certain times where maybe you just want to leave things alone. But actively managing the woods is in any part of your land, fields, woods, etc., is never a bad thing for wildlife unless you're developing a large factory or something for some reason in the woods. I will let you know too, all these pictures, this picture of this turkey actually is from right behind my parents' house in Wells. From my game camera, I just sauntered right up to it. It was really nice. So I'll point out some of the more interesting photos as well too, so you have some context for those. Before we start any conversation about habitat, you want to talk about the different components of habitat. Those the four main ones: food, shelter or cover, water, and space. Usually the ones that we're going to be able to impact, or you're going to be able to impact on your own land, are going to be that food, shelter, maybe water to an extent, but typically that food and shelter / cover elements. And that's kind of what many practices that are commonly done on private lands focus on. Space obviously is a matter of connectivity and other things around the landscape that you yourself on your own property aren't necessarily going to be able to control. And then water is just, if there's water nearby or not, really. There's not much you can do to make sure that there's a stream nearby, and unless you buy a property with that in mind. Then the question comes always, somebody always wants to do what's best. What can I do to improve habitat on my land? A lot of folks tell me, I just want to do what's right. Well, what's right and what's the best very much depends on what's there, what your goals are, balancing all those things out. And and keeping wildlife in mind for all those aspects. So with that being said, the cost share programs that I work with, these are all funded by the Natural Resources Conservancy, Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, which is under the USDA. You'll notice with any federal thing that there's nothing but acronyms, as per usual. So I've kind of laid them out here. The three main programs are the EQIP, CSP, and RCPP. These are the kind of context that we'll go through these practices that usually I work with landowners to get funding to do some of these things. So just keep those in mind. I'll touch on them and what they actually do and what they are a little later on. And this photo, by the way, is a restored wetland in Leicester, I believe. So I'm just going to dive into some common practices, and then as we go, when there's questions at the end, I'll get more specifics. So a very common and a very simple thing to do if you have apples on your property is an apple tree release. Obviously these release the apples from competition with trees around them, which gives them direct sunlight. That's going to improve their productivity, their growth rate. They don't have to put so much time into trying to grow out from under those trees. They can put more energy then into producing fruit, which is always a great thing for wildlife. Depending on what type of wild apples you have, or if they're an old orchard, they may be a good thing for you as well too, depending on how they taste. So this is a really common, a really simple one. You're looking to release an apple tree from competition, basically, so it gets plenty of sunlight. Pruning is also a really important thing with apples as well too. We're almost past the time when you could really prune an apple and be safe. But that's typically done in the wintertime. But you can release apple trees from competition from cutting other trees around them pretty much any time of the year. On that same line, Masteries are an important thing. Mast just means a hard or soft producer of fruit. So whether it's a nut like from an oak tree, like an acorn, or it's a cherry from a black cherry tree, or even an apple, like we just mentioned, this is a little bit more in the woods, focused on certain things. You're looking to release good, healthy trees that are going to have and then improve growth rates. We'll do the same thing that I mentioned with apple trees, where they produce more mast because they're not then competing directly with the other trees in the forest around them. And this little guy here in the picture is a little brown bat. They don't roost in trees, but it's the coolest picture I have from my time being an intern years ago. This is probably 8 or 9 years ago now, doing bat work. But you'd be remiss if we didn't talk about bats when we're talking about mast trees, particularly with things like shagbark hickory or really big old trees with holes and cavities and loose bark. We do have two species in Vermont, particularly the Indiana bat that's federally endangered, and the northern long-eared bat, which is federally threatened, which do roost in trees. So really important species to keep in mind. They love that loose bark. These doing master release in a lot of cases, especially with those big trees or with shagbarks, like I mentioned, really going to improve roost situations for those bats as well too, and improve habitat for them at the same time as producing more food for all the other wildlife. So this is just a list of some common masteries release. This is kind of what it looks like after a mastery release is done. The picture on the left is a shagbark hickory. You can see that unlike the one on the right, it does still have a couple of trees that are somewhat close to it. That's because they were other shagbark hickory, and we didn't really want to cut those down you want to cut a good thing for another good thing, really. But typically you want to open up the canopy so that it has plenty of sunlight around it. It's just get within a few feet of the canopy. You can see from that right picture, it's been growing in such a constricted way that its canopy is much smaller than it could be. So that's something to look into with that. Common masteries release are kind of listed here. The biggest ones that are going to be your biggest producers, particularly in the valleys in Vermont, whether you're over here in the Taconics in the Vermont Valley, or you're over in the Connecticut River Valley in the south, or even in the Champlain Valley, are going to be red oaks and hickory. I mean, red oak mostly because it's most common. White oak's really fantastic. Both of our species of hickories, there is another species of hickory, but it's really rare. But then once you get up into the mountains more, you're going to be looking at things like black cherry, yellow birch. Surprisingly, it's seeds, it's catkins is what they're called. A lot of different bird species really love them, and things like serviceberry as well too. And there's plenty of others as well, but those are just some examples for what's common in the valleys, what's common in the mountains, things to look for. Early successional habitat is a really important one, particularly in southern Vermont where we don't have as much of it. Particularly in the far southern reaches of the state. So it's really an important piece. And this is talking about, I'm talking about a conglomeration of different things here. I'm talking mainly about young forests in my examples here, but this could involve shrubland forests. This could involve grasslands as well too, various different types of early successional habitat. These two photos here are actually from a cut that was done to create, that was really low quality pine that was cut to then get some regrowth in the area, get that thousands and thousands of stems growing. It provides great food, provides great cover. This is right on the edge from a landowner in Brandon that I worked with that did a patch cut, and this is just what I think he cut it in February, so this is like 6 months after the cut was done. He's already got bobcats, bears. He's had turkey and plenty of deer as well too. But just a neat kind of perspective for you. What things just show up all of a sudden when you have these diversities in the landscapes. The other importance is the other really important factors of early successional habitat is that we lose it a lot to different land use changes, and this isn't necessarily just farmland or development. It's also abandonment of that land, because you're not going to have as much young forest or grasslands or shrublands when land is abandoned as well too, as it grows back up into forest eventually. So kind of maintaining a mosaic of different habitat types across the landscape. These are also really important for many neotropical bird species as well too. They really like to have, a lot of them really like to have these young, highly growing areas. They produce a lot of insect biomass. So they just love to kind of peck around in these and eat all the insects that they can find. And it's also a really important browse and cover source for things like deer as well too. The areas that look like, this is kind of an example of what a type of cut that we do to create early successional forest looks like. This is a stand of pine in Pollitt that is really rough. It's that way because it grew up from pasture in the past. You can see it's got many low branches. The value of that pine has kind of lost its cover value overall because it's so tall now, so it doesn't really hold snow as well. There's not a lot of diversity. This is in wintertime, but you can trust me as well too, there's not really much growing in the understory of that bit of forest either. So in this case, we looked at that. There was an example of, this is something that's not really very valuable. Nobody's going to be able to make money off of it. This is a perfect thing to help somebody restart the forest and get some good early successional young forest growing up in this. These some of the pine will come back, but typically you're going to find other things like aspen, birch, a little bit of maple, that type of things that are going to sprout right up after this, also including blackberries and raspberries and all the other herbaceous things as well too. Pasture pine is really common down here in the valleys, and also declining early successional hardwoods, which are things like aspen stands and paper birch stands. Once you get up into the mountains, you're more looking at hardwood stands that are kind of declining or poor quality, things like diseased beech and the like, really, or kind of damaged stands from ice or wind throw, things like that. And here's a picture of a patch cut. This is roughly in the same spot. You can see in the top, kind of left of the top picture, that one little pine there with all kinds of weird stems. It's the same thing down here in the bottom picture. This is just a year after this patch was cut. So the cut was done in September, I believe. And then this is a picture from the next year in July or June, maybe. I can't remember exactly. It was a couple years ago now. So you can see how fast that stuff bounces right back. This is an exceptional example. Usually it takes 2 to 3 years at least to get stuff like that. But you can see it bounces back, provides a lot of cover, a lot of growth. So it's also acting as a really great sequester of carbon as well too, because you're getting thousands upon thousands of stems growing up in those areas. A lot of things that we leave are standing dead trees. You can see a few of them. They will blow down, as you notice in the bottom picture. A couple of them aren't there, but they are great things for raptor perches and other things like to den up in them. We leave a lot of rough whole material on the ground as well too. Cycles nutrients in the soil, keeps things easy for small mammals to get through, and then also an element of protecting regeneration, because deer will eat all of this back if sometimes if they're not overwhelmed enough with too much. And then we leave live trees as well too. Can't see it in this photo, but right behind me there's a bunch of oaks that were left to be seed trees for this area, and there's a bunch of maples on the edge that had seeded into this as well. And then probably the biggest one that we get requests for, and I talk to folks about all the time, is invasive plants. Particularly if you live in southern Vermont, it's almost a guarantee that you have invasive plants on your property somewhere, unless you live in like Reedsboro or Searsburg, way up in the hills. Then you might not. But down the valleys, especially, native plants get suppressed heavily by these invasives. Common things that folks always see are bush honeysuckle and buckthorn and all the multiflora rose and things like that. They're really the reason they stick around is because they prolifically seed. They put out so much seed that it's really hard to keep up with them, basically. And that seed can remain viable for years and years in the soil. So even getting rid of it once, come right back. Another key thing to mention for wildlife is that these plants, while wildlife will eat them occasionally, they're basically like junk food. They're basically kind of the McDonald's of the wildlife buffet. Really kind of runs through them, and that also provides a nice avenue for spreading that seed as well from these invasives. So there's a couple of different methods of control, and this is these pictures kind of show some contrasting methods. On the left is a mechanically done control, this was pretty much all invasive plants on the edge of a field in Brattleboro, and on the right is some chemically treated stuff. I can't remember specifically where that one was from, but just show you the difference. So obviously, if you grind stuff down, you mechanically remove stuff, there's not much left. You're gonna have to manage that over time. Chemically treated, obviously, there's stems left. That's something that everybody needs to make their own decision upon. We do both types of management where it makes sense to do both types, both economically and feasibly, logistically wise. Mechanical control isn't necessarily going to be something that's reasonable to do, miles and miles out in the woods, where there's plants, whereas, on the edge of fields and things that are easy to access, it's going to be more realistic. The biggest thing with invasives is that it's expensive to treat them no matter how you do it. So that's why the programs are here to kind of help that. If you have invasive plants and you don't treat them, and you do some type of cut in the woods for, like, say, a current use plant or something like that, it makes regeneration really difficult, because these plants are going to be the first thing that come back in and try to take over, rather than the native stuff that you'd rather have growing. And this is a list of some of the common invasive plants. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but is pretty common. I would say the top ones are honeysuckle, buckthorn, barberry, multiflora rose, and bittersweet in the woods. When you get along rivers, I'm sure as many of you know, you just go to Ludlow, for example, or go to Grafton, and look at the Saxton's River or the Black River, and they're loaded with knotweed. So those are common places to find that. The others, like parsnip, wild parsnip or poison parsnip, everybody's seen along the roads, I'm sure, or in their fields. Same thing with chervil and garlic mustard. They're more herbaceous things. And then once you get into the wetlands, you see things like Phragmites and purple loosestrife as well too. So you've probably seen a bunch of these, and you may just not know exactly that that's what they were. So the programs that I work with to kind of assist with this work are USDA cost share programs. The primary one is EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. You can sign up for this anytime. It doesn't really matter when you sign up, but the applications are put into batches, so there's only a certain time period where they rank those applications and give out contracts to assist with things. Typically there's 2 in a year. This year we only have 1. Just depends on how much money is available from USDA to be able to do this. And it's the key important thing for habitat work is that it's non-commercial work. So obviously we're not going to put funds towards something that could fund itself based on the selling of timber from that harvest or anything like that. In case you're wondering, this is a picture from my hometown in Wells, Vermont, looking out towards Granville, New York, from the top of the hill in the North Pollitt Hills area. You can see all the farmland, and you may even see the slate quarry in the background over there. The other one that's commonly used, but is more of a kind of after you've done some work with NRCS or with the programs, is the CSP program, which is the Conservation Stewardship Program. Again, this is a continuous sign up. This is only ever 1 application deadline per year, unlike EQIP, which usually has 2. And there's got a larger number of practices available. Basically, it's a wider range. They call them enhancements instead of practices to address concerns. This is you're going above and beyond what's already on the ground, kind of going that extra mile really to see what's there. And then I know I kind of blew through a lot of that stuff. It's really hard to condense all the stuff down. The biggest thing I'll say is that the best thing to do is to have me, if you're in my area, or one of my colleagues come out to your land, contact us. I know for me, email's the best, but I can't speak for others. But contact us, let us know. That's the best way to really get out on the land, speak with you, get a feel for what your goals are for the land, how to balance those things, and what might fit on the land for what's possible. Basically, every property, every piece of land, every tree is different, so you're never going to know specifically off the top of our heads what's going to fit where. The other one thing before I open it up for questions that I want to mention that I didn't really include in this presentation yet, that is a growing kind of interest really, or 2 things really. One is the pollinator habitat. That is a growing interest, and it's something that we're really looking into, and we're really getting out with folks and trying to do now. We haven't done enough of it yet, so I don't really have any great examples of that work yet. So it's hard for me to put nice pictures and things like that together for it. It is very important. Pollinators obviously are a aspect of our wildlife that we need to try to balance out better. They have plenty of other things going against them. But that's something that we're happy to talk with you about too as well. I've had many folks that have been very interested in that recently. And the other is the carbon storage versus sequestration kind of discussion. And that's something that we try to, if that's an important goal of yours, we want to try to find the right balance for those types of items as well too. And I've worked with a handful of different folks where we've talked about things that we can do to manage for habitat, but also manage for those carbon storage and carbon sequestration aspects as well too. But yeah, that's kind of my spiel. I'll take some questions. I know there's probably going to be plenty because it's it's a very broad topic. But feel free to ask me anything. This last picture here, by the way, is from the top of Herrick Mountain. That little mountain on the side there is Bird Mountain. This is part of Bird's Eye WMA, which I manage in Castleton, Poultney, and Ira. And that looks out towards Lake Bombazine there. But anyways, yeah, I don't know what you got, Joey. If you got some questions, I'll leave this slide up here for folks to write down any contact info for the folks in their area if they want.
Yeah, cool. Great. Thanks, Travis. So I'm just going to go through the chat and kind of fire off the questions your way. All right.
Okay.
So the first question we got is, should I thin trees to no overlap of drip lines?
Yeah, that tends to be the way, particularly with apple trees. We're looking at the drip line. If you don't know what the drip line is, it's kind of the edge of where those branches come out of the trees. Apple trees, that's really important. When I'm talking about Masteries and releasing Masteries more, we're looking a few feet out from the drip line, really, or what would be the equivalent of a drip line.
Great, thanks. So the next question is, I am trying to open up small patches amongst alders as small as an acre. Are open patches this small helpful?
In an alder area, definitely. We alder strip cuts. There's not something that we do commonly because it's just not common for me to run into a landowner that owns a lot of alder swamp typically. But alder strip cuts that are half acre or so, even sometimes down to a quarter acre, can be beneficial, particularly for woodcock or timber doodle or whatever you want to call it. They use those areas during the mating season in springtime a lot of times. So those are really important areas. Smaller cuts in larger woods, it kind of depends on what the goal is and what the composition of the forest is, really. If you're doing small cuts like that, and it's, for instance, your forest is composed of a lot of things that are really shade tolerant, like beech, you're probably not going to get the regeneration that you want. You're probably just going to get more beech to come back. But if you're doing small group selection for increasing structural diversity for birds, and it's not an area that's dominated by shade tolerant or heavily shade tolerant species like beech, yeah, it could be great. It could work out really well, and you'll get a diversity of levels in the canopy to add to the forest, which will be a great thing for wildlife.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, what species benefit from untouched areas of climax or old growth forest?
Yeah, that's so you're looking at a lot of it's there's not really necessarily one specific species. The biggest thing to keep in mind when thinking about different aspects of habitat across the land is that most species use those areas plus an intermediate age forest plus a young forest plus fields. They use a wide range of those habitat types. You know, things that you're going to find in big old forests a lot of times are going to be the same things that you find in different young forests as well too. They just use it for a different purpose. But you know, deep forest type stuff, they use things like, you know, scarlet tanager, you know, that's common. You know, you might see moose or even bear in some of those areas that are core woodland areas. But yeah, it's a spectrum really of what they use, and they're moving about constantly using those different areas for different reasons over different times of the year or even different times of the day.
Great. So the next question is, how soon can I cut and stump treat buckthorn and honeysuckle?
Well, as a licensed pesticide applicator, I'm going to tell you that you need to be careful with that, and that, you know, technically in Vermont, by Vermont law, you can do that on your own property without a license. But if it's a big amount, I would recommend consulting a licensed person as well too. But typically that type of work, you can do the cut part whenever you just want to leave a taller stem left, so that you can get a fresh cut. If you wanted to say cut it now and then, you know, just leave a bit of the stem higher so you can get a fresh cut later, you can do that. But typically when they do that is usually later in the year. It's usually going to be the same time that you tend to do foliar treatments. You know, that kind of, you know, August, September, maybe early October type time period, really. That way, if you're treating anything chemically, you want to have it at the period where one, other things are going dormant so that you don't potentially impact them, and two, the fact that it'll draw those resources back into the root system all the way. Um, that way you don't end up with wasting a bunch of time and effort and money.
And it looks like the next chat was from Tammy, who said buckthorn and honeysuckle are best to cut and stump treat in the fall when they're sucking nutrients into the roots. So
Exactly.
Thank you for that, Tammy.
Yep, exactly. That's precisely. I mean, a lot of the folks that are licensed and do that for a living during the summertime will do some of that stuff up to August as well too. But definitely that late summer, early fall period is the best. You don't want to wait too long because then they'll be dormant already and they won't draw as much down. There is other techniques that can be done on large stems in the wintertime, but they're not as environmentally friendly.
Great. So Bill from New Hampshire is wondering, are there similar programs in New Hampshire?
The NRCS programs are. I don't. NRCS in New Hampshire doesn't have a similar agreement as the NRCS in Vermont does with Fish and Wildlife and FPR like we do. So they don't have the same type of technical expertise that you get here in Vermont from folks like myself. But they do have the same programs. I would say look up the NRCS website and just type in NRCS New Hampshire, see what the closest center is to where you are, and give them a call, because they have the same practices and the same potential to do the stuff. They just don't have as much capacity because they don't have the same agreement with Fish and Wildlife in New Hampshire as we do in Vermont.
Great. So the next question is, will CSP provide grants for parcels as small as 10 to 20 acres?
It can potentially. There is technically no lower limit for these. The only limit is that you're ranked against every single other potential project in the state. So it may be a long while as a smaller project unless it's improving something for an endangered species or something that's very important to make it rise to the top. It might take a while for you to get funding at a smaller acreage, just because larger properties obviously are going to have more things that they can do, so they're going to rank higher typically, so they get screened out first, and then it takes a little time to get to the smaller areas.
So the next chat from Tammy, if you like this topic and want more, check out, and she put in a link to Vermont Covert's website. So yeah, everyone, in the chat, you can see a link there to click on for some events of a similar interest. Thanks, Tammy.
Definitely. And I work with Lisa, who is the director of Coverts, quite frequently. Every fall, I do the walk usually at the annual meeting afterwards for the training, and then people from the annual meeting come as well too. It's a great organization with other peer landowners. So if you want to talk to another landowner, that's a great avenue to go through as well too first.
Yeah, Vermont Coverts is also a co-sponsor of these workshops as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're a great partner. Okay, so the next question is, over 80% of land in Vermont is in private ownership. Of the 80,000 plus parcels, over 40,000 plus parcels are under 5 acres. Most funding programs are for larger landowners. What funding / resources would be available for the smaller landowner?
Yeah. So like I said, with the funding, it's tough, but with programs, just for the reason that you stated in the question, really, that they tend to favor those larger areas unless, like I said, there's something extremely unique about that small area. The one benefit in Vermont is because we have this agreement and we have these staff members that you see on your screen here, including myself. We're a free resource for anybody, to reach out to give technical assistance to. So while it may not be potentially money to do the things, at least on smaller acreages, you still can reach out to us, and we can provide you with technical assistance to help kind of come up with a plan and help you kind of guide you along the way of what might be best or what you're kind of interested in doing.
Great. So the next comment from Jeff: some great work being done to couple pollinator plantings with solar installations.
Yep, I don't have much dealings with the solar folks because I'm not a regulatory biologist, and that's pretty much all of them, because there's lots of permits and other things going to putting up solar developments and other things. But yeah, I've seen a lot of the newer stuff is really really great, and they always usually are putting together aspects where if they're unable to do some of that stuff, they usually are making recompense for that by helping to do some of that work elsewhere.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, for bringing that up. So the next question is, could you comment on biochar and whether there are any local resources?
Um, yeah, I don't deal with biochar very often. It's not a topic that I really deal with, so I'm not probably the best person to really answer that for you, unfortunately. But if you let me know, I can get back. I'll get back. I can get back to Joey, and if you can send that out, maybe I can give an answer to that from somebody else. I have to find
Yeah.
the right person for that answer.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about the resources and what the best what's the best avenues are really to give you a good answer to that.
Yeah. So Travis, if you want to, yeah, shoot me an email with some stuff. I'll also include these contacts in this slide that we're seeing now in an email,
Mhm.
maybe later today or tomorrow, and I'll send it to everyone who registered just as a resource for some contacts. And Travis, if there's anything you want included in that, send on
Yep.
over.
Yeah, no, sure.
And then the next comment is a compliment to you, Travis. Really nice photos in your
Oh yeah,
presentation.
that's it's I get the unique opportunity to see a lot of very cool stuff, because I spend 3/4 of my time out in the woods. So um, I like to try to take good pictures and share them when I can.
They are some great photos. Uh, so the next question is, how small a patch cut can I go for gold-winged warbler habitat?
For golden warbler habitat, well, first off, you'd want to make sure that you're in an area where golden wings are likely to be. We actually have a special kind of focus over the next 5 years, a project that's going to be partnered with Audubon and with the Rough Grouse Society, um, to do more golden wing warbler habitat. And the focus area is typically the Champlain Valley and its edges. So if you're in that area from, say, Pulteney up through Franklin County to the Canadian border, then those are great areas. Um, Doing patch cuts, if you're talking about a patch cut in a fully forested kind of section, like a mature forest, you want to go bigger, usually 5 acres or more. If you're in a shrubland area, you can do small. You can get away with smaller areas because you're just basically promoting that shrubland aspect a little bit more, uh, which are different aspects of the types of habitat that they'll use. So a lot of the work in the past in Vermont has been focused in the Champlain Valley, particularly in Addison, Chittenden, Franklin County. I think mostly Addison County on that shrubland aspect, because that's the place where we see them the most in Vermont. But we're trying to expand that into those other aspects to see if we can expand our benefits to golden wing warblers. So if it's in a forested area, 5 or more acres. If it's not, you could get away with a smaller acreage, 1 or 2 acres. But you want to make sure you have the right elements there.
Great. So the next question, if I am physically unable to do the physical labor, can I hire help?
Oh yeah, the especially with these programs, like they don't expect you to do any of this work. They give you the money for you to hire people. If you can do it yourself, then you just take the money yourself. But yeah, certainly like if you get funded for invasive plant control and it's chemical control, you have to have a licensed pesticide applicator do that. So you'd have to hire somebody. If you're doing a big cut, you're going to hire a logger unless you happen to be a logger yourself, and can do it. So yeah, definitely that's the a key point. You can however you do it is fine. If you get a contract through the programs, you'll know exactly how much money you'll get, and you can use that to get quotes and see what works the best.
Great. So the next question, and looks like the last question, does it work to pull out honeysuckle with a tractor winch versus chemical treatment?
Yep, certainly can. Just depends on if you're able to. The one thing I would say with doing it that way is that you'll have to keep a closer eye on things as well too afterwards, because when you're pulling it up, you may not be getting all the root system. There may be seed that's going to come back in. But yeah, you can just go. You just have to do it, year after year until you start not seeing it anymore. Like I said, that's part of the mechanical type of control. I showed the really extreme of mechanical control, but mechanical control can be anything from using a tractor with a winch to pull things out to grinding it down like I showed in that picture. So certainly that's a viable option if you can. It takes a long time. So just like any of those plants, you're gonna keep coming back to it year after year. You're probably not gonna have those big ones that you need the winch to pull out, but you're gonna have to come back and maybe do some hand pulling of those new seedlings and things that come up over the years.
Great. So that looks like it was the last question. If anyone has any lingering questions, now would be the time to throw those in the chat. But otherwise, thank you all so much for attending today, and thank you, Travis, for the great presentation and information. Hope everyone learned something today. And if you're interested in a workshop focused on more habitat management for birds, next week we'll have Vermont Audubon. Jillian, their director of conservation, will be giving us a presentation on woodlands management for birds and their forestry for the birds program. So I encourage you guys to check that out.
And I'll just say too, like feel free, if you live in my area, or even if you live in the other area of southern Vermont, Windham and Windsor, feel free to send me an email as well too. Tyler is brand new, so you can send it directly to him. You can send it to me, and I can get it over to you. Feel free to send an email out anytime to me. That's the best way to reach me. That number is my office number, and now that I work sometimes from home and most of the time in the woods, I hardly ever get to check that. So it might be a week or more before I check that. But definitely feel free to reach out anytime. I'm happy to answer any questions as well too, no matter where you are, if I can.
Yeah, and going off of that again, I'll send out contact information and I'll follow up email to everyone. But it does look like we did get one more question. Can you comment about planting new trees to improve the habitat?
Yeah, that's something that we will do occasionally. Typically, those are going to be more riparian plantings, things like that, to improve stream bank, erosion issues or wildlife habitat connectivity. Occasionally, though, you will get chances where, say, I have an example of a cut and pollet that we did on a private land there, where we did the cut. It looked great. There was a lot of good things coming back up, but the diversity really didn't come back up that we were looking for, or that the landowner was hoping for. So they decided that it might be a good idea. It happens to be that this particular property, the county forester, this family happens to own, but so he has a little bit more knowledge, obviously, about things. So we talked about it, and we worked out a way to improve that diversity with kind of an interplanting amongst the stuff that had already come up, just to kind of increase that diversity over time, and also that resilience, that climate resiliency, and also resiliency to different pests and things that are arriving as well too. So it's definitely an option. It's the problem, and the reason that I'm always cautious about plantings, unless it's a small planting, like you're putting out some oaks or some apple trees or something because you want them for the deer or for other wildlife or something. plantings can be very, very costly for one, and they're always going to have mortality. And that mortality can range from 40% to almost 100% sometimes, depending on what the conditions are afterwards, how well it was put in the ground, a whole lot of things. So they're very costly and very difficult to maintain kind of aspect, but they definitely do have their right uses and right purposes and can be very beneficial in the right circumstance.
Great. And there's one last question that popped up too.
Mhm.
What is the best method to control / remove Japanese knotweed?
Woof. That's and if you figure out the best that works every time, then you'll make a lot of money probably. It's a really tough. Japanese knotweed is one of the toughest species to get rid of, particularly when it's well established and there's a lot of it. Um, I've had chemical treatments be successful. I've had chemical treatments be not successful at all. I've had folks use cover things with black plastic, and that worked. And I've had people do that same thing, and it grows right up through the plastic and busts through somehow. There are a few other alternatives. I just have one landowner in Woodford that tried this. It's a kind of a European technique that came out of Europe, where you use really small diameter kind of chicken wire, and you put it over it, and basically you keep kind of cutting it back, and it basically restricts the plant so much that it uses up its resources over time. He tried it over here. It's the first person I've had try that, and he had middling kind of success with it. So it's really tough. The one surefire way to get rid of it is to continually pull it, which is really difficult, and it'd probably take you 5 or 8 years to do that. But that's the one way that I've seen that always moves it. The problem is you might move it from your property just down the road to the next one because it's just going to move its way along.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, Travis. We're actually piloting that wire mesh method. We began it summer 2020, and we're gonna kind of do a report assessing the efficacy of it. So we'll see how it goes.
That's great. Yeah, like I said, it was just one landowner that tried it, so I don't know exactly how much he stuck to exactly everything. So I don't know if it's just anecdotal, not great, or if it'll actually could be done if it's done exactly the right way.
Yeah, we'll let you know in 5+ years.
Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's all the questions. Thank you all again. We'll be in touch with some contact info. And like Travis said, feel free to reach out to him for more specific questions.
Yep.
All right. Thank you all. And hope to see you next week. And thanks again, Travis. This was great.
Yep. No problem.
All right. I'm going to end the call now. See you.
See ya.